Thanks for being here and welcome to the Tango Banter. I am freshly back from the Gavito Tango Festival here in LA, which in very surprising ways was probably my best festival experience yet. I will be sharing some of those experiences in my live banter this Friday. So if you would like to join in a live setting, make sure you join my Facebook group. The link is in the show notes. And if you want to receive a reminder on Friday morning with the link to the live broadcast, you can sign up for my newsletter. And the link for that is also in the show notes below. So, as I mentioned last week, I've been taking a little bit of a break of sorts. I've paused my production of fresh new content and removed myself from social media for a little bit just to take some time to assess, figure out what is it that I've actually done over the past year or so as I've dedicated myself to this endeavor of pursuing a path of content creating and figure out where I want to go with it. One of the things I have been reflecting on is what this podcast is all about, where it's going, what I want to do with it. So it seemed fitting to revisit my very first episode, which, to be honest, I was really afraid to do. I guess I was afraid of this cringy feeling that frequently you might have when you look at stuff that you've done earlier. I sometimes feel that way about my writing, for example, when I look back and read some of my stuff, some of my journal entries from a few years ago. There's a little bit of this like, oh, I was so naive. But uh, I have noticed in my artistic and creative pursuits, it actually works better to look back and assess something way after you make it because it reveals certain things. And this was no exception. I decided to listen to the first episode, and it was really interesting to think about who I was at the time and what fears I was dealing with, compare it to where I'm now. Um, it's just a very somewhat therapeutic process for me. I got to be honest. Because when I listen to that first episode, I really hear all of the fear in my voice and the sort of questioning whether what I was doing was made any sense or had any value at all, because it was just such a random decision to one day sit down and start bantering. But it also was kind of cool to realize that my last episode that I published that was new, that was new content, fresh content, was about age. And my very first episode is actually about that already. So without knowing it, I basically already had the podcast sort of laid out for me, and a lot of the themes that I ended up chatting about with you during the lives and within the Facebook groups and in person, all of these themes are already present in that first episode. And I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know when I sat down that day that I had already had it figured out in a way. I just sat down and started talking. But that's kind of how it is. It's such an interesting paradox. And it makes me think of this interview I read some time ago with Henri Matisse, the famous French painter, who said that when he did his very first painting, he was already a fully formed artist. This is how he thought of himself when he was older. And he said, in that first painting, I was already fully formed. And it took me the rest of my life to understand myself, to study that, to figure myself out. So, this is kind of how it felt for me when I listened to that first podcast. I hear so much angst and nervousness in my voice, and I hear my hesitation and the too many ums and pauses and stalling. I hear all of that, but at the same time, the main components of what this podcast has evolved into and the impact it's had on people, the ingredients for that were already there. So there are two things that I want to say about this in my introduction to the replay of my first episode. Is that number one, I want to just give you a friendly reminder to really go for it, whatever that is for you. And I've noticed that in the recent months, so many dancers have come up to me and struck up conversations and shared with me some amazing ideas, whether it's about starting their own company or writing a book or recording an album, just a lot of creative ideas. And if you happen to have something like that you've just been sitting on and you're kind of just wondering, like, I wish I could do that thing. I want to encourage you to go for it because you never know. You really never know what you end up with, what it takes you to. It's really wild. I would have never expected many uh, so many ripples from this podcast out in the world. And the second thing I want to say is, as I look ahead at the next season of Tango Banter, I think about what effect I want this podcast to have and craft my topics according to that intention, to really have a purpose to that. So I've been thinking about, what is it that I want this podcast to do? What meaning I want it to have in the world? And over the past year and a half that I've been publishing, I noticed that the most meaningful feedback to me that I get from people that really resonates and makes me sort of smile and think to myself, yes, this is it. This is what I wanted. Is when people tell me that my podcast brings them peace and puts them at ease and gives them a sense of relief, a peace of mind, a reassurance that they're okay, that what they're feeling is okay, that what they're experiencing is normal, they're not alone, that they're not crazy. This is what I love, because of all the things that have helped me to get where I am now, whatever success I have in my life has really largely come from those really special people in my life who looked me straight in the eye and said, "Go for it. You're okay. I believe in you. There's nothing wrong. Keep going." And so when I hear that my podcast inspires that in other people, this is sort of my fulfillment of my purpose, I feel. So, of course, I always appreciate hearing from you. And I love knowing what's landing for you, what you're learning about yourself. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. And you can do that through social media, reaching me through Messenger or on Instagram. You can also email me. And or if you want to share your story in person, if you see me at the Malanga, this has been one of the most entertaining parts of having a podcast because I just have people come up to me and share the most fascinating stories. And I love stories. I just really, really thrive on those. So now there's one thing that I'm really excited to tell you about that nobody knows yet. So you're the first. You're the first. I think I will definitely know who my diehard listeners are after this episode airs because in the next season of the Tango Banter, I will feature a pilot episode with none other than my soon to be husband. Yes. Uh, Many of you know Alex. He has recently stepped in and been helping me with the sound production of my episodes, and he's really getting into it. So, we're going to experiment with recording an episode together and just see where it goes. But one of the things that I've been hearing a lot is that there is a desire for people to really hear a conversation uh, addressing these topics in tango, but getting feedback from both men and women. And so Alex and I are going to take a crack at it and aim to have an honest dialogue about all of these amazing experiences we have in tango and how they impact our lives. So stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed to my newsletter if you want to stay up to date on that. And now let's go back to that very first episode of the Tango Banter. Tango, age, and how short your skirt has to be to get a dance. Greetings, friends. If you're listening to this, then you must be a close friend of mine because this is my very first episode of a podcast that I have been thinking about doing for a really long time. And it's interesting to observe how much I've been wanting to do this and how nerve-wracking this is. How strange it is to think that I'm going to record something and then somebody else is going to listen to it. But here I am. My name is Elisabetta, by the way. And this podcast is called Tango Banter. And the idea of Tango Banter podcast is to do just that, to banter, to talk about topics that are integral to our everyday functioning as social dancers, things that we experience, um, things that come up, and things that we don't really get to talk about when we're out social dancing. Because when we are at the milonga, most of us are dancing. We might not necessarily have an opportunity to really dive deep into topics. But from time to time, that does happen. And when it does, there's some really interesting nuggets that I yield from my time out with people. So I'm using this medium as a way for me to begin to put some of my thoughts into a form that can be passed down, that can be shared, because there's a lot to say, and I feel like I want to say it. It's time to say it. I think I'm starting to say things that many people have been wanting to say, but maybe haven't felt like they can. And I feel that way myself. But I guess the difference is that I'm kind of pushing myself to say these things just because I don't like to be afraid. I want to push past the fear. And so that's been part of my lifestyle as a dancer as well. So I started dancing in 2009. I was a young woman looking to define herself and find her femininity and confidence. And I wanted to feel beautiful about myself. I wanted to be desirable. Let's just put it that way. And I think everybody has that feeling when they're young, especially, college age and that whole time period. So I've been thinking a lot about this idea of age within tango, and this is kind of what I want to talk about today. I hope that that I can share with you something new, but I also am so curious what you think about these ideas, because that's one of the things that is important, is that we get to learn about ourselves and how other people feel, because that's been one of the things that is kind of amazing about tango, is that we are so individual, and but yet we're so connected. We're so separate, and yet we're so like in each other's space, literally. So anyway, this is my invitation to strike up conversation across this platform, and maybe you can join this conversation other ways through social media, or if you want to send me a message on Facebook or something. I really would love to hear your thoughts on the matter. So anyway, when I started tango, I was in my 20s, and I didn't have a lot of confidence. I felt really weird in my body. I had a lot of social anxiety, and tango was this strange place that kind of made me confront all of that and made me grow. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't like I came in and it was just thrown into my lap. But I did have some natural ability, so I progressed pretty fast. I progressed, within a few months, I was in the advanced class, and it gave me a lot of pride. And my ego, my ego grew, and I wanted that magic. I wanted to dance with strangers around the world. I wanted to travel and be that person that a stranger wants to dance with. and there was a lot of focus on becoming that desirable object. And I did a lot. Like I did a lot to become that. I changed how I dressed. I changed my hair. I changed my clothes. I started wearing stuff that was more provocative, and it took me a while to actually like learn to wear that without feeling weird. Like when you first put on a short skirt, if you're used to just wearing pants, it's like, and like it took a while, and a lot of it was uncomfortable. Like I remember in Buenos Aires, when I would get dressed for the milonga, I would put on my butt skirt, the famous skirt by Roxana Vincelli that has the ruching on the butt. And then I would, put on my little, I don't know, tank top or something. But then I would put like a jacket over me because I'd be like so uncomfortable to be walking down the street and showing a lot of skin, because then you get all these men howling at you. And I just like I really tried to own it, because I could see women who would wear a lot of very provocative clothing, and I'd be like, oh, I so want to be that way. Like I just want to like not care. And I I went there. I learned how to be provocative. I learned how to feel confident while wearing clothing that is perhaps revealing in some ways. But eventually it was like, like no matter what I did, it's like everybody's doing that at the milonga, and it's just like this one-upmanship. If somebody wears a short skirt, somebody else is going to wear something even shorter, and it becomes this weird competition. Um, and so even though I was a good dancer, I progressed very fast, and I wasn't like bad looking, and I have a good body, I have good proportions. I don't know, like I felt I filled the boxes. I could check off all the boxes that were required. I still had this really difficult time at the milonga in terms of really having a good time regularly and consistently. It was always like it either was awesome or it sucked. And a lot of it depended on how how attractive could I make myself to attract the dancers that I wanted, and how to avoid dancing with the dancers that I didn't want. And it was very stressful. And so then as I matured in the dance, and as I got, I think, just a little bit more desiring something different, really wanting some sort of other experience. Like I just didn't want to jump through all these hoops. That made me even less attractive, because then I'm just like, ugh, if I can't have what I want, I'd rather just sit it out, Like it got to this point where, yeah, I could get a dance if I wanted to. Sure, I could say yes to all these people, but ultimately it seemed like sitting it out and waiting for something more special made sense. But that something special is like so unpredictable. And so sometimes you just kind of get tied to this, like, oh, this specialness. You gotta get that perfect tanda, and it better happen in the next hour, because otherwise I'm gonna leave, and there's a lot of drama with that. So I definitely felt there was a difference in how like my success rate at the milonga. So to me, it became very clear that men, for the most part, go to the milonga to dance with women, while women, us, we go to the milonga to dance. We don't necessarily have a preference. I know there's exceptions to that. I know I've actually been turned down by a couple of women, because they prefer to dance with men. And so I understand that there's that preference. But for a lot of us, myself included, when we go, we're really looking for the dance experience versus for most men, there is some sort of sexual undertone a lot of times. And I shouldn't say most men. I actually don't know because I, have a limited perspective as an observer of men being a woman. But I think there's definitely that edge for men a lot more versus for women. And so, yeah, it's really changed for me over the last few years as I realized that as a follower, I wasn't really going to get any further. I didn't really want to become a professional dancer, like stage dancer or competition. It's not me. It's kind of like, it's not why I'm in tango, right? And so it kind of, and I wasn't really clear on what I wanted out of tango, but I just knew I couldn't really continue it in this way because I really wasn't willing to do what it seemed to take. So I went to leading. I started leading because I loved tango way too much. And I just was like, in whatever way, I will figure out how to dance tango. So leading seemed like an obvious path. And I appreciate that about myself. Like, I appreciate that I wasn't like, oh, my tango is now over because nobody wants to dance with me. Because that happens a lot. That happens a lot for people. It kind of, like, they think that people don't want to dance with them, and they think of themselves as not desirable, and that's, to them, is like, okay, that means I'm going to stop. And I totally get it. I totally get it. But I'm glad I didn't do that because I want to keep dancing, obviously. So I started leading out of necessity. And I remember once I started leading and I actually started thinking more like a leader, and then little by little realizing that now that I was leading, I felt kind of strange wearing a butt skirt. I don't know why, or that I definitely didn't want to wear heels anymore. And then it went from that to more and more decisions to like change my makeup and change my jewelry and change my manner, change the way I walk into the room, change how I say hello, change how I capaseo, and it was very spontaneous. It was kind of like that. I just kind of morphed. I really watched myself transform over time. And I feel like now, having gone through that whole process, my age doesn't seem to matter anymore. I really feel that this transformation in tango, it's the connection with other women. And I think it's because I don't think about my desirability being based just on men. I want to be attractive to women because I want to dance with them. So I'm invested in a certain way, and it actually then makes me kind of excited when a woman compliments me versus a man, because, like, I don't know, I always say, like, with a man, it's not that hard to impress them. Just lift the skirt and that's enough, that works. But for women, for me, whenever I've received a compliment from a woman, about anything. It always is like, oh, wow. Because for a long time, I was actually very intimidated by other women. And I was convinced that they were thinking that there's something wrong with me. And then, I'd get a compliment from one of them, and I'd be like, oh my God, wow, she actually likes me? That's amazing. So it helped me with my confidence. So the big idea that I want to introduce, and I'm putting out there into the ethers, sparking up this first episode conversation that I hope to continue off the air. This idea of age and how do we deal with it personally, individually. Age is such a big idea, and in the context of tango, how much does this feeling of being defined by your age, how much does that affect you? So I'll leave it at that. That will be my parting thought, and I hope to continue our little banter next week. I'm going to do this every week now, and we'll see where it goes. Sometimes I'll have guests on. I'm imagining little banter between people on particular topics. And of course, there will be just me bantering while my cat is chewing on a plastic massager. There's all of you out there who are witnessing a birth of this project, hopefully a long-term project. I'm grateful that I get to do this with you, and couldn't really do it without you guys. So you know who you are. All right. I'm outie. Chat with you.